The station had never gone dark in 3,000 years. Not once. Not during the Chryseth Uprising. Not during the long silence. Not even when a moon fell out of orbit and cracked open like an egg 40 kilometers from its outer ring. Today, every light on Threshold Station went out at the same second, and nobody had touched a switch. Commander Vael Ossyrin stood in the dark and did the math before she did anything else. That was the kind of officer she was. 340 years old, and in every one of them she had never once let fear arrive before calculation. Her hands found the edge of her console out of pure memory, fingers resting flat against the cold metal, bracing without knowing yet what she was bracing for. One name moved through the comm static before anything else did. Just a name. Dessen is here. Nobody explained who Dessen was. Nobody needed to. Every soul on that station had grown up on stories about the mercenary who worked alone, who had never lost a contract, who had once ended a 3-fleet siege by walking through the front gate and asking politely for the keys. The Empire didn't hire Dessen. The Empire feared what would happen the day someone else did. This is exactly the kind of story Humanity Revenge HFY was built to tell. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because where this one goes, you will not see coming. Now, back to the dark. Dessen didn't come for the station. That was the first wrong detail. The kind that sits in your stomach before your brain catches up. The tactical display, running on backup power, showed one signature approaching, alone, unescorted, moving at a speed that made no sense for a single ship. Vael frowned at the numbers. A ship that size had no business, carrying a power plant 3 times larger than its stated class. Nobody builds a scout ship with a battleship's heart. Nobody except someone who expected to need it. The comm crackled again. This time it wasn't a name. It was a designation nobody in the room recognized. Confirming target, Shepard. Option. Vael had heard every classified term in 2 centuries of service. She had never heard this one. She filed the 2 words away in the part of her mind reserved for things that would matter later, and returned her attention to the ship on the display, because right now there were more immediate problems than a phrase she didn't understand. Dessen requested docking, not breached the hull, not fired a single shot. Requested. Politely, in fact, with the kind of calm voice you'd use to ask for a table at a restaurant. Every officer on the bridge expected panic in the crew, expected the Marines stationed at the docking ring to lock down, weapons hot, fear thick enough to taste. Instead, the junior technician monitoring the docking bay laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not the laugh of someone breaking under pressure. A real one, short and surprised. Like something had genuinely struck her as funny in the middle of the worst morning of her career. Vael turned to look at her, and the tech just shrugged and said, "Sorry, it's just, of all the ships to actually dock, instead of blowing a hole in us, I did not expect the assassin to use the front door." Nobody laughed at Dessen. That was the wrong reaction. And it hung in the air a beat too long before the moment moved on. The mercenary came aboard alone, no escort, hands empty, wearing armor that looked older than half the crew's service records. Vael met the ship at the airlock herself, because if the galaxy's most feared contractor was walking onto her station, she intended to be the first face they saw. What she found instead was not the towering nightmare the stories promised. Dessen was smaller than expected, moved like someone counting steps out of habit, and carried, of all things, a mug, plain metal, dented on one side, the kind you'd find in a mess hall 100 years out of date. "I need to speak to whoever runs weapons procurement," Dessen said. "No threats, no demands, just a simple, almost tired request." Vael escorted the mercenary personally, partly out of protocol and partly because she wanted to watch, up close, the creature the whole quadrant told bedtime stories about. Dessen didn't look at the guards lining the corridor, didn't look at the weapons trained on every angle, looked instead at a maintenance panel someone had left half open and reached out without breaking stride to click it shut. The way you'd fix a small thing in your own home without thinking about it. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who stays until the end of a story like this one, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. To Humanity Revenge HFY, this is exactly the kind of story we live to tell here. Now back to the corridor, because Desson was about to say something that would change everything. Vael thought she understood about the last decade of her life. In the procurement office, surrounded by officers who had spent careers preparing for this exact confrontation, and never once believing it would actually happen, Desson set the dented mug down on the table with a small, precise click, and said the thing that would end up in every report written about that day. You can fight anyone in this galaxy. Species, empires, fleets, doesn't matter. I've fought most of them myself and been paid well for it. But I am formally advising the Empire, one time free of charge, to never touch a human. Nobody laughed this time. The room went very still, the kind of stillness that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing on your chest before anyone says a word. An admiral near the back of the room, a man who had built his entire career on contempt for lesser species. Thursday, Desson repeated. Not urgent, not desperate. A day of the week, delivered like an appointment reminder. I left that system on Wednesday night, and I have never, in 30 years of contract work, moved that fast for a threat I could not even see. The Admiral finally spoke again, quieter this time. The contempt drained out of his voice and replaced with something closer to the beginning of understanding he clearly didn't want to have. What happens on Thursdays? I don't know, Desson said again. Nobody does. That's the part of this story that should keep you up at night. Somewhere in human space, there is a machine, or a fleet, or a plan, that a farming colony with no standing military considered dangerous. Enough to hide from a professional assassin using nothing but a polite deadline. Vael thought of the technician who had laughed at the docking bay, the wrong reaction that had made no sense until this exact moment. Humans didn't panic the way the reports said they should. They built quietly, they waited patiently, and when the moment came, they didn't announce anything. They simply asked you calmly to be somewhere else by a specific day. The shepherd option, Vael realized with a slow, sinking certainty, was not a weapon. It was a policy, a quiet, decades-long agreement among a fractured, disorganized, endlessly underestimated species to never, ever show anyone what they were truly capable of building until the exact moment it was needed, and not 1 second before. I'm not here to threaten the Empire, Desson said, straightening slightly. The closest thing to formality the mercenary had shown the entire meeting. I'm here because I took your money for 30 years, and I owe you the truth before you make a mistake that cannot be walked back. Fight the Kryzeth. Fight the Elune Combine. Fight anyone else in this galaxy you like. But do not touch the humans. And do not go looking for what happens after Thursday. Because I promise you, whatever it is, it was built by people who had all the time in the world and nothing left to lose. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The Admiral looked down at the table instead of at Desson. The particular stillness of someone who has just understood something too large to argue with. Desson picked the dented mug back up, the same casual motion as setting it down, and turned toward the door. At the threshold, the mercenary paused and said one more thing, quiet enough that only Vael, standing closest, fully heard it. I kept the mug, Desson said, because a boy on that colony gave it to me on my last day there. He said I looked like I needed a hot drink more than I needed to finish the job. I never told him what I was there to do. He gave it to me anyway. Before we close this one out, if this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit the hardest. And if you know someone who needs to be reminded what humans are actually capable of when nobody's watching, finally broke the silence with something that wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a scoff. Humans, he said, like the word itself was beneath him. That backwater species with the short lifespans and the fragile little ships? Desson didn't answer right away. That was the thing about Desson that the stories never quite captured, the quality of rarely speaking, and then saying something that rearranged the entire room when they finally did. "I took a contract 4 years ago," Dessen said. "Simple extraction job. High-value target, minor human colony, in and out before anyone noticed. I've done 1,000 jobs like it." A pause. "Not for effect. For something closer to memory. I have never finished a job like it since." The mercenary set both hands flat on the table, the same gesture Vael herself made when bracing for numbers she already suspected she wouldn't like. "They didn't fight back like a military," Dessen continued. "No formations. No command structure I could find and cut the head off of. I extracted my target in 11 minutes, clean, professional, the way I always do. And then I could not leave the system for 6 days. Because every single human on that colony, farmers, teachers, a woman who ran a bakery, had spent that entire time building something none of them had ever built before, coordinating through channels I never detected, doing math I never saw coming." Vael felt something cold settle behind her ribs. "What did they build?" "I don't know," Dessen said, and for the first time, something that might have been the ghost of real unease crossed that unreadable face. "I never found out. That's the part that should frighten you more than anything else. I'm telling you today." The named unknown returned. "Shepherd option." Vael watched the Admiral's expression shift. Just slightly, just enough to notice, and understood in that instant that somebody in this room already knew exactly what those 2 words meant, and had been hoping nobody would ask. Nobody asked yet. The story wasn't finished. Dessen described the 6th day. The mercenary's ship, cloaked, engines cold, had been sitting in high orbit. Professional caution outweighing the urge to simply leave. A single unmarked vessel rose out of that unremarkable colony, no larger than a supply shuttle, carrying no weapons any scan could detect, and approached Dessen's cloaked position with a precision that should have been impossible for a stealth. "Signature that expensive." "It found me anyway," Dessen said. "It didn't fire. It didn't threaten." A voice came over an open channel, human, calm, and it said one sentence. It said, "We know you're there and we're not angry. We just need you to leave before Thursday." The room did not move. "Go ahead and share this one with them. Humanity Revenge, HFY grows one story at a time. And it's this community that keeps these stories alive." Now here's how it ended. Vael stood at the docking ring long after Dessen's ship had cleared the station, hands still resting flat against the cold metal rail. The same brace she'd used the moment the lights first went out. The station's power had come back hours ago. The dark had passed. But something in her had not come back the same way. She thought about the technician's laugh. About the maintenance panel Dessen had quietly closed without being asked. About a species with no empire, no throne, no grand fleet parked at anyone's border, that had somehow made the deadliest contractor in the known galaxy leave a system a full day, early, because of a deadline delivered. Like a dinner invitation, somewhere out past the edge of charted space, on a colony too small for most star charts. Farmers and teachers and a woman who ran a bakery were quietly building something the galaxy would only understand the day it became necessary. Until then, they would keep asking politely for everyone else to simply be somewhere else by Thursday. Vael finally let her hands relax against the rail, grip pressure easing rather than tightening, the particular kind of stillness that belongs only to people who have understood, at last, exactly how much they do not know. She thought, too, about the boy who had handed a killer a mug of something, hot, without asking what the killer had come to do. That detail stayed with her longer than any of the numbers, longer than the 2 words she still could not find in any classified index she had access to. A child, a warm drink, a stranger who had just finished ending someone's life, quietly a few kilometers away. And still, the boy had looked at a tired, dangerous man and seen only someone who needed kindness more than judgment. That, Vael suspected, was the real weapon nobody in the Empire had ever accounted for. The plain, stubborn insistence on decency, even when it made no strategic sense at all. She filed her report that night the way she always did. Precise, unemotional, complete. But she added one line at the very end that wasn't required by any regulation. One she almost deleted twice before letting it stand. It read simply, "Recommend no further contact with human space without full council authorization, and recommend we stop asking what happens on Thursdays." Nobody above her ever answered that line. But years later, long after Dessen's name had faded back into legend, Vael still kept a small dented mug on her own desk, and still glanced at the calendar every Wednesday night before she let herself sleep. Even patience has teeth.